Hello, I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and this is Radioland, my weekly radio trends newsletter. This is the podcast version where you get it read to, in case you're having trouble reading. And this podcast is brought to you by RSS.com, podcast hosting that's actually free. And RSS.com has just been announced as one of the podcast hosting companies which is supporting Apple Podcasts' new video, which is very fancy. You'll find more information over at Pod News. Now, Edison Research at SSRS released the Infinite Dial 2026, which I co-presented. You can download the slides and watch the webinar in a link you'll find in the newsletter. My takeaways from that are that there's real growth in 55-plus listening to online music services like Spotify and YouTube Music. And in fact, YouTube Music is the number one in that demographic. It's unsurprising, really. Today's 55-year-olds were using computers in their late teens, Napster and LimeWire in their late 20s, and when the iPhone and Spotify came along, they were more likely to be able to afford them. The old trope of 55-year-olds not understanding technology is not really a thing anymore, and I should possibly know because I hit that age this week. Of course, people aged 55 plus are radio's stronghold, but of significant growth of online music services for this age group suggests that, again, we need to think more carefully about what radio's unique proposition is. And for more on that, I'll be speaking at Radio Days Europe next week. AM/FM is still number one in the car, and we all know that that really means FM, but AM/FM use has decreased by 11% in the last decade. And if you're aged below 35 in the US, AM/FM radio is not number one anymore. That's online audio, Spotify and that sort of thing. Indeed, if you are 18 to 34, 55% of you are listening to podcasts in the car as well. Big changes in terms of that. And a new high for podcast listening, as you'd expect. YouTube unequivocally the number one for podcasts, but the weekly podcast reach is growing faster than the monthly podcast reach, which would suggest that some people are listening to podcasts more often than before. The only thing that matters really is the total time spent with podcasts. Last year, that was 773 million hours a week in the US. This year's number will be out later in the year. Infinite Dial measures people, not time. But I really enjoyed co-presenting this for a second year. The data is useful, the trends are fascinating, and I would love to see Infinite Dial in more countries as well. You can find it in Australia and New Zealand, but how about your country? Particularly the UK. I would love to see Infinite Dial for the UK. That would be fascinating. Elsewhere, TikTok Radio launched in the US on 28 broadcast stations, as well as the iHeartRadio app, I'm assuming mostly HD, but who knows? Anyway, TikTok Radio has existed on SiriusXM for 4 years, but this seems a new launch with iHeart personalities who also happen to be on TikTok. The radio station is jointly branded iHeart's TikTok. You can listen in a link that you'll find in the newsletter. There's also a TikTok podcast network. Now, there has been a station called TikTok Trending in Australia since 2021. That's been really slickly programmed by Triple J Ollie Wards and is apparently the number one digital radio station for under 30s, although Ollie hung up his headphones in January from that. So who knows what the future of that station is going to be. The US station sounds slick, but the Australian station sounds more recognisably TikTok, I would say. Frankly, I'm unsure why ARN wouldn't replace the automated CADA with TikTok and put it onto FM in Sydney. Sounds like a good plan. Now, media regulator news. The ACMA, the Australian media regulator, still hasn't made a decision about ARN's licence conditions. And that's still important because even if the Kyle and Jackie O show is dead, the additional licence conditions are still relevant because they govern both Kyle Sandilands and Jackie O Henderson separately. And right now, at least, Carl Sanderlands is still contracted to ARN. The ACMA received ARN's representation to those licence conditions on or before December the 9th. Kyle and Jackie O have broadcast for a further 6 weeks since, and the ACMA's legal responsibility is, in part, to encourage providers of broadcast services to respect community standards in the provision of programme material. You'd have to ask yourself, another 6 weeks of Kyle and Jackie O without those licence conditions, is that really your legal responsibility? Anyway, I've submitted a Freedom of Information request to see those documents, and the ACMA has referred that decision to ARN. I'm not really holding my breath on that one. Staying with media regulator news, the ACMA has released new data on trends and developments in viewing and listening, and some of that information is pretty good, and there are revenue numbers in there as well for both radio and television. But the what app do you listen to podcasts in is fatally flawed, because the regulator asked about Apple Music, which doesn't have podcasts in it, and YouTube Music, which does have podcasts in it, but most people use the proper YouTube for podcasts. I've asked the ACMA to find out the exact options given to respondents, but they've not bothered to respond. In Spain, many COPE AM stations, COPE is a full-service and religious radio station, many of those are broadcasting loops, telling listeners to retune to FM frequencies. Yes, this is AM Death Watch Corner. Public service broadcaster RNE closed its AM network at the end of last year, so big changes going on in Spain. They've also turned on DAB Plus there as well. I followed a bus the other day. It was promoting the new 4BC breakfast show with Sophie and Dean. There was a big picture of Sophie and Dean on it. There was a logo saying 4BC Brisbane. No mention of any frequency. No mention of the word radio. And worth a peek, the Jacobs Media Tech Survey 2025. I linked to that from this week's newsletter. You can find that at radioland.email. It's best thought of as a piece of research of radio fans because it's completed by people on radio station listener mailing lists, but it's no less interesting as a result. And of note, when asked why they listen or why they don't, people scores higher than music in every single chart. So where am I speaking next? Well, I'm speaking next in Riga in Latvia next week, talking about the future of audio being people-powered. Very much looking forward to doing that. First thing on Tuesday morning. Don't party too hard on Monday night if you're going to that. It seems to be in a nightclub or something, so I will be... possibly not doing that. But anyway, so hopefully, if you're going to Radio Days Europe, then hopefully, please come. Track 1. First thing on the Tuesday morning. I'm also talking with Steve Jones of Stingray, talking about TuneIn, talking about Canadian radio, talking about car karaoke, which sounds hideous, and lots more things. That's on Monday afternoon. And I'm in a session on Tuesday at lunchtime-ish about what happens when you lose your big star from your radio station. Anybody would think that Kyle and Jackie O is top of mind there. Anyway, looking forward very much to that. It's still not too late for you to get your ticket. RadioDaysEurope.com is where to go for that. And I'm also speaking at the podcast show in London in the UK, keynoting at that event and also recording a Pod News weekly review. Please come to that too. That's May the 20th to the 21st. Thepodcastshowlondon.com is where to get tickets for that. And thank you so much to the supporters of this fine newsletter and podcast, the good folks at Meliora, the good folks at Media Realm, and at Radio Today in the UK as well. Thank you all for your support. Also, Marty from New York, Gavin Watson, Greg Strassel, Sam Phelps, Richard Hilton, Emma Gibbs, Jocelyn Abbey, and James Masterton for being regular supporters as well. If you would like to support my work in any way, then please do buy me coffee.com/James Cridland is where to go for that, or hit the funding button if your podcast app has a funding button. That would be good too. And you can also grab the email version of this newsletter, which is slightly better produced than this podcast version. You'll find that at radioland.email. I'm on Mastodon, james@bne.social if you're there too, and my website has more details about who I am, what I do, and whether I can help you further. That's james.cridland.net. And until next time, keep listening.